Wedding guest told to leave when he arrived in his military uniform. The biggest unwritten rule of any wedding is not to upstage the bride. It's meant to be her big day, and the one she has been looking forward to her whole life. If there's a dress code, you better stick to it, otherwise, you face the wrath of a very angry woman. One bride's wedding guest turned up in a military uniform, and instead of welcoming the man, she threw him out of her ceremony. The wedding guest who turned up in his uniform wasn't a super close friend of the happy couple. Obviously, they knew who he was, otherwise he wouldn't have been invited, but the military man wasn't their best friend or anything. In fact, the man in question was actually a family member of one of the couple's family friends. He may have been someone's +1, but he was about to become a -1. The bride had taken exception to the fact this man turned up in his military dress uniform, instead of black tie clothes like the invite said. Upon his arrival at the wedding, it was clear this military man was very well decorated. The bride wrote that her wedding guest had turned up wearing his Marine's formal wear. Although the formal uniform is designed to be worn at black tie events, it's not quite as discreet as a regular suit and tie would have been. The Marine was not only wearing his military dress uniform, but he had fixed all of his medals onto his chest to show what he had done for his country. While the guests may have been impressed, the bride didn't like his outfit. Besides the outfit that the Marine chose to wear to the wedding, the bride said that the man was practically a perfect guest. After arriving at the wedding, the bride said the man was acting perfectly politely, while not making a fuss about his presence. Despite attending someone else's wedding, there was a little group of teenage guests who took a shine to the Marine. The young girls wanted their picture taken with the military man, and he graciously agreed to be in their pictures due to their excitement. He wasn't deliberately causing a scene, but he was distracting. Normally your invitation to a wedding will give you a description of what your hosts expect from you. They might inform you of any presents they want, or if they don't want any. The dress code is typically included, especially if it's something a little different from the norm. In her Reddit post, the bride said she has nothing against people in the military, but stressed it was a black tie event. To her, it felt as though the man wearing his Marine's dress uniform was very out of place, and she thought he might be trying to show off. Guest lists for weddings can get out of control unless you're pretty strict about who you invite. This bride had over 300 guests coming to her wedding, and it was one big celebration of love. The bride said that of the other 300 or so guests, no one else had felt the need to try and stand out by the clothes that they wore. A wedding is meant to be focused on the happy couple. The Marine's choice of outfit wasn't sitting well with the bride. She said it's totally fine if the military man wants to wear that kind of outfit to his own wedding, but hers had a dress code. Ignoring the dress code. The bride felt that the point in having a dress code was to ensure that no one stood out from the crowd. According to the bride, it was impossible for the Marine to blend in with everyone else. Thanks to the uniform the man wore to the wedding, he was making plenty of friends from the other guests. People were coming up to him and thanking him for the service he provided for his country. There was no doubting his bravery in fighting for his country, but wearing his uniform was also a brave move. He was now facing the scorn of a bride on her wedding day, something no one really wants. The bride felt as though the only reason the Marine wore his uniform was to steal attention from the bride and make her day about him. She felt as though this was something that you just aren't meant to do at someone else's wedding. The uniform wasn't impressing this bride, and before long she was sick of seeing the Marine. This was meant to be her day to have the focus on her, not his. Upon seeing the Marine in his uniform, the bride couldn't stop getting distracted. She said that he should have known his uniform was going to make him stand out from the rest of the guests. According to the bride, the whole point of uniforms in the military is to make sure the people don't stand out from each other. Now he was using his uniform for precisely that reason, to stand out from everyone else. The bride just couldn't get past the man wearing his uniform, and apart from the distraction it was causing the wedding guests, she couldn't focus. It was her big day in her fancy dress, but to the bride, it felt like all eyes were on this guest. She and her husband were meant to be the stars of the show that day, but the man was drawing too much attention, and the bride wasn't thrilled. There was nothing else the bride could do to stop him from distracting everyone. He had to go. How was she ever going to have the wedding of her dreams when everyone was so obsessed with this guest? To take back control of her wedding, the bride asked the man in the military uniform to leave. She had seen enough and didn't want him there any longer, so it was time for him to go. The bride did admit on her Reddit post that she felt bad about asking the man to leave. He had made a special effort, but he hadn't followed the dress code according to this newlywed. She said that even though she felt bad, him being at her wedding didn't feel right. There would have been no problem if he had just come along in a suit and tie as the other male guests had done. It's not hard to find polarizing points of view on the internet, and it didn't take long for battle lines to be drawn in the Reddit thread. Some people supported the bride's actions that day, while others couldn't agree with what she did to someone wearing a military uniform. People aren't always going to agree with your actions, although the bride did her best to justify what she did to those who didn't support her. Some of the people on Reddit were quick to point out that the Marines' formal uniform is classy and can look black tie when compared to other uniforms. While some of the users thought the uniform was subtle enough to wear to a black tie event, others felt what the Marine did was wrong. Looking classy. They thought his choice of outfit was extremely disrespectful toward the bride and groom for not sticking to their dress code. Although there were polarizing points of view from both sides of the argument, the majority of people were in agreement. The consensus on the forum was that both the bride and Marine had behaved badly. While the guest should have tried his best to keep a low profile like everyone else, many felt the bride was being too precious. She should have let it slide and not been so insecure about someone stealing her thunder. One former Army sergeant discussed wearing military uniforms at formal civilian events. They said as far as the Army is concerned, wearing your formal uniform is permitted as per the regulations. The sergeant did say that it takes a special kind of person to wear them to a wedding without approval from the bride and groom though. It's their day, and if they don't want people wearing military uniforms, that's up to them to decide. The sergeant went on to justify why they thought it wasn't okay for a military person to wear their uniform to a wedding without permission. They said it is like wearing white to a wedding, and you are very clearly competing with the bride for attention. According to the sergeant weighing in on this argument, they felt as though the Marine should have just worn civilian clothing. Or at least checked with the couple beforehand. Even though the sergeant thought the Marine should have worn something else, they didn't support what the bride did either. The former Army sergeant thought the bride's choice to kick the Marine out of her wedding was a bit much. There were probably a few options open to the bride before having to resort to throwing the Marine out of her wedding. Sure, he had made an error, but two wrongs don't make a right. The sergeant told the bride that she had two roles on her wedding day. Sure, it was her special day, but there were two things she was meant to be doing during the wedding. Firstly, she is the host and also the one being celebrated by her friends and family. Despite being celebrated, the sergeant reminded the bride that she was also the host, and sometimes you have to deal with things not going perfectly. After the Marine turned up in his uniform, the sergeant said the bride should have grimaced and gone along with it. The sergeant thought the military uniform was unlikely to be the only faux pas that someone made during the wedding. If she was going to kick people out for their little indiscretions, then there probably wouldn't have been that many guests left in the end. Everyone should be cut a little bit of slack. With over 300 guests at the wedding, the sergeant thought one person in uniform should not have been enough to ruin the bride's day. He was just one of many wedding guests, and the bride could still have had a great day. Instead, she chose to throw someone out for the clothes that they wore. Even though technically the uniform is a suitable outfit for a black tie event in the eyes of many Redditors. One commenter said the bride thought the Marine was showing off because she automatically assumed the worst. They thought this attitude showed the bride was self-centered, and the guy was probably just proud. The bride compared the man's uniform to an Olympic medal, and if a guest had won gold and was parading it around the wedding, she would have asked them to leave. She said weddings are not the place for show and tell.